like a topic of building a club coaching programme. So could be quite interesting. It's got good interest from a number of people, whether that's actually club coaches or other people involved in the development and running of clubs. So Kylie Lindsay is going to lead this session. So for those of you that haven't met Kylie, Kylie's one of our club development officers and works specifically to support our West of Scotland region, but then also picks up a part-time contract in our performance team as one of our senior performance coaches. And then Kylie's going to be joined and supported by Lauren Selby this week, who is the Director of Coaching at Off the Wall Squash, which is based in England. But I don't want to say too much because I'm aware Kylie and Lauren will go into the detail, but lots of experience today around that club stuff. And as I say, make use of that chat function, and we'll try and keep up with questions as we go through. Cool.
Okay, thanks, Alan. We'll get going. Just before we get into it, I'll just briefly say a little bit more about Lauren and myself. So as Alan said, I work for Scottish Squash as a development officer and senior performance coach. My background is ex-professional player for New Zealand. When I finished playing, I worked at a club in New Zealand as a coach, and also did various regional and national squads there before moving to Scotland for this opportunity about 18 months ago. And I'm very pleased to welcome Lauren as well. Lauren's a good friend of mine. She's also an ex-professional player. We played on tour together. And since she's finished playing, she's done some great stuff in coaching. She set up Off the Wall Squash. She's the director of coaching there. And she's also the Norwegian national coach. So she's got some good knowledge, and we're looking to kind of share that with you guys today. So thanks, Lauren, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So yeah, the webinar today is on developing a club coaching program, and what we want you to get out of that is just some things to consider when you're creating your own programs, what the kind of key program areas are, and hopefully give you some good practical examples from both of our experience. The ideas that we've got today are just from our own experiences and some from our Scottish Squash resources. So one thing along with the questions, feel free to share any ideas in the chat as well that you guys have had that have worked really well when you're doing your own club programs. I think the more we can share, the better, really. So please feel free to do that, and hopefully Alan will pick that up if he doesn't disappear with his power cuts. But okay, so I'll just share my screen, so hopefully this works. So when we're looking at a club coaching program, I think we're looking to fill it with as much variety as possible to cater to the different member categories that you have at your club. So I thought a good place, well, firstly to start today is where you actually start with when you're creating a program. So some of the things we've come up with are like, who are your current members? So it's a good idea to identify the demographic of the members or the membership at your club. So whether that's male, female, juniors, seniors, and then you can really see if there's any gaps in your membership that you might want to try and fill with different programs, and maybe also why there might be gaps. And alongside that is also trying to build an understanding of what your current and maybe potential members need and want from the club. And this is probably a common theme from Paul's webinar a couple of weeks ago about developing as a coach, is getting feedback. So asking your members what sort of things they would want in a club coaching program, and also maybe about current programs that you've already got, just to get more of an idea, because I think it's easy for us just to assume we know what they want, but I think that's a key part. And also with potential members, I think it's a good idea to research your local area, because you might not have a certain demographic of people because they're not in the area that your club is. So I think having all that sort of knowledge before can help you create a better club coaching program. One of the other things, and this is from the start that I said, like don't be scared to share ideas or seek ideas or seek information from other people. I think a big thing like that could be from other clubs in the area, other coaches. You can see at the moment with the situation that we're in, that there's lots of content on social media that you can look at. There's the webinars, like it's great that you guys are on here today. We've also got Scottish Squash that have set up, which I think is a really good thing, is we've got for Scottish clubs and coaches, we've now got forums for people to communicate and share ideas on. And I think it's just, if we can get more clubs with really good club coaching programs, it's only going to be better for squash as a whole, and that's what we want. So I think don't be afraid to share your ideas. One of the other things I think to look at when you're trying to create your program is, what are your downtimes at the club? Because I think a lot of clubs will be busy maybe from after school to evening or after work to evening, but there's a lot of time like during the day that could be used for different groups. So I think it's good to see where that is in your club and what could be filled. I think we have some ideas probably a bit later on. I think Lauren's got some ideas around that, about how you can fill some of the downtimes in at the club. One of the other things I think to think about when you are designing it is your available capacity at the club and also your available workforce. So not all clubs, if you might create a new program, but actually you might not be able to hold it at the club just because you don't have the courts all the time. So it's just keeping that in mind, and that kind of links into like when the downtimes are, so what you can fit into there, and also available workforce. I think I spoke to a club the other day that have been doing really good things in the local community, but then they got an opportunity but then didn't have the coaches available to actually go and do it. So I think when you are creating something, it's just making sure that you have the capacity and the workforce to be able to do it as well. And the last thing for me on this was just don't be afraid to try something new. I think that's always a bit scary when you haven't done stuff before. But I think it's great. Like if it doesn't work, that's okay. You can always change it. You can get feedback on it and make adjustments to it. But I think try something new, and it might be the thing that's really successful at your club. So Lauren, did you do anything in particular when you were starting out with your coaching program that you did before you actually put the programs in place?
I was pretty lucky. Like I'm from a squash family, so I grew up in a pretty successful squash club. And at the time, community squash and the squash club sort of were so busy that, I mean, it's great, and I loved it, and I have fond memories of when I was a junior, and that always stuck in my mind. I think is about the community feel, and I find that squash is quite a community sport. Everyone sort of chips in and is always generally quite friendly. And my mum, I was lucky when I was on tour. My mum was a manager of a squash club, and I used to coach full time in the squash club, and saw some of the things that she was doing to generate interest, and I had a lot of ideas from that. But I didn't really focus on it until I actually stopped playing professionally, and then I had to sort of face the challenge of being a full-time coach. And I was at a club at the time called Ardley in Colchester, and some of you may know a famous squash player called Del Harris. He came from that club, and there was a lot of history. But the coach at the time, Lee Drew, who's now an England coach, had started a small program, but it was mainly elite based. So I had to start from scratch, and I really felt the community thing was important. And I also was thinking about my philosophy as a coach and what I wanted to do in my career. And the big thing for me was that I wanted people to enjoy squash like I had. So squash has been a part of my life, and some of you may know my brother. I'm often called Daryl Selby's sister for most of the time, but my whole family involved in squash, and I wanted people to have squash as part of their whole life, and I wasn't necessarily fussed whether they would be top squash players. If they were, then great, but if not, it was about having squash as part of your whole life. And so I decided to start small, and I started one junior session a week and one ladies session, and did a little fitness program in the day. I just updated the boards and sort of started from there, and it grew. But the big thing was for the community thing for me, and I'll come on to this later, but I realised that the schools were really important in terms of sort of feeding into the squash club, and because it was quite a family orientated place, it was easier to get kids in, and later on I moved to a different venue which I'll go into, and it made the challenge a bit harder, but yeah, I think building that community base and starting small is really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you want it to be a place that people want to come and spend time and play squash and socialize and bring their families and that together. So I think that's a really good point. So the next thing we're going to go into is just what we think kind of the key areas in a program are in a club, or different groups of people that you might target with programs. So the first one for us is school squash. So I'm just going to speak a bit about our Scottish squash school squash program first. So we've just recently finished our school squash resource, which Kevin Moran, I think, who's also on this call, he spent a lot of time on this resource, and it's a really good thing for schools and coaches to be able to use. It follows the curriculum outline. It has a QR code on it for people to watch videos. I think it's a really comprehensive resource for people to be able to use. Kevin's also set it up on Instagram. It's under Scottish School Squash on there. So again, it's just another platform, especially for maybe the younger kids who use Instagram a lot more to use and use the resource then to plan sessions and stuff. So that's just recently been released during lockdown. So that's what we use when we go into schools. So from a Scottish squash point of view, we go into schools to help deliver to the sport leaders of the school a Squash Leader Award. So as part of that package, we do the court installation. Hopefully you might be able to see the picture there. We tape the walls in the school gyms so they can use well, it's as much like a squash court as we can get basically in a school. We also deliver staff and PE staff CPD sessions, so they can then get an idea of what they need to do as well. And then we deliver the Squash Leader Awards to kind of the senior school, which then hopefully then allows them to go into primary schools and deliver their own sessions as part of that's kind of sport leader program. And we found that that's worked pretty well. And schools are quite keen for us to do that because it's obviously a great opportunity for their sport leaders to add to what they're doing. So as part of that, like, we go on and do that. I think one thing that we've found and we really want to put an emphasis on in the next season when we're back on court is the link between the school and the local club. I think this is really important because we can go into schools and get people interested, but if there's no link with the club, then that's when we potentially lose some students that are interested in playing squash. So we really encourage the local clubs to build that link with the schools around them, and we're there to facilitate that as well. Put you in touch with your local active schools coordinator, the local schools, help you to put in place anything you need to actually be allowed to go into school and deliver. So I think that's something that we really want to try and build in this next kind of season, I suppose. I know it's not always easy, and I think Lauren will come on to this because she's been pretty successful in the school squash stuff to get the the buy-in from students to go down to the club and actually become members and get involved in the junior programs and stuff. So I think Lauren has got some ideas around that, which will be good. Just one kind of example for us, Matt Bedwell, who's the coach at Hamilton Squash Club, he joined myself and David Fallon when we went to some of the schools to deliver this. So he was able to learn what we were doing. He then was put in contact with the active schools coordinator, and he's actually now set up some things going into primary schools. They're actually asking him now to go in. He's not having to ask. He's got a active schools after school program happening at the club, and I think all this stuff just builds the link between the club and the schools, which hopefully then leads to more juniors at the club and participating in programs. So that's just one little example of what's worked well last season for us. But I think, Lauren, you have your school squash program slightly different to what we do, but I think it's been very successful. I see plenty of social media stuff about hundreds of kids joining in. So do you want to tell us a bit about yours?
Yeah, so when I started full-time coaching, the development officer in my area recommended that I go into the local primary school, which scared me senseless, because you have there's no qualification that you have that you can learn how to go into a primary school with 30 kids. So that was a bit scary, but I thought I'd give it a go. So I contacted the school that was closest to the club, and I think that's really important. If you can get a primary school that's in walking distance, because then the opportunities for them are far greater in terms of not having to spend money on transport, etc. So I contacted the local primary school, and I lucked out a bit because the head teacher was really sport orientated and was keen to give it a go. So I took my 16-year-old assistant, and he was scared out of his mind, into a primary school with 30 kids, and we made it up. We had the mini squash nets, which I wasn't very good at putting up, and it took me ages, and I was stressed out about it. And we started from there with one school, and we did a 6-week course, and 5 weeks we did in the school hall, and then they walked on their last week to the squash club, and they had to go on the squash courts, which was like absolute pandemonium. And I made lots of mistakes. I did a lot of things wrong, which you learn from. And I had nothing to go on, so I was making up my own curriculum. And from there, it sort of grew, and the link between sort of the head teachers in the area was key for me. So that in England, you have a consortium of primary school head teachers, and they have meetings, and luckily the head teacher had spoken about the squash I was doing, and then I managed to get a few more schools on board, and I had 4 in the end, all running the same 6-week program. And from that, I started to get a few more juniors into the club. And I then also decided to run a tournament, so a primary school tournament. So we had 4 schools, and they came down to the squash club, and they entered a team from that school. So that I decided I wanted it to be 2 boys and 2 girls to be in a team. One of the biggest bugbears for me, I don't know if you feel like this, Kylie, a lot of the elite events had sort of more men than women in a team. So PSL, the European team, like when you go to the under-19 Europeans, it's 2 boys and 1 girl, and it's always less girls than boys. And I was determined to have a bit of equality, so I had 2 boys and 2 girls in each team, and it was chaotic, but it worked. And then it sort of grew from there. I moved venues. The club that I was at shut down randomly one day, and I had to find another venue. And we went to an army barracks which had 6 courts, and the challenge was that we didn't have any club members there. They were just a few army guys playing squash. So the school program then became extremely important in terms of getting kids in. And I think squash has changed in that respect. When I was younger, you know, your dad played squash and your mum played squash, or you played squash. And a lot of people from my generation, Kylie, you might feel the same. Yeah. It was like all about your parents playing squash. And now I think it's changed a bit. So we have to reverse it so that we get the kids in, and then from the kids, we get the parents to play. So it's almost a flip round. So yeah, we now have 15 schools that we work in. I have 9 coaches, 5 full-time, 4 part-time. We teach 2,000 kids a year. And our last Roman Cup, we had 2 last year, one for year 5 and 6, one for year 3 and 4. And I think in total we had about 260 kids compete. So it's blown up a bit. It's kept me busy.
So with that, so are those coaches and stuff involved in the whole academy, or are they just for school squash?
The whole academy. There's only 2 that do just schoolwork.
Okay.
And they're part-time, but they help out because quite often we have 2 schools at once. So in a morning we'd go into 2 schools. So we always have 2 coaches in every session. So that needs 4 coaches. Yeah. So it's quite a juggling act to make sure that everyone's in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm. And I think you also said about a program you have for, is it Rising Stars?
Yeah, so following the Roman Cup, and the reason we called that is because Colchester's a Roman town. We're trying to educate them. Yeah, so we thought, that I think what you were saying earlier about that link between club and school is important, but also probably the hardest part of it is getting kids into your club. And buying into squash, because there's so many other sports out there. And we decided to start a scheme called the Rising Stars. So we invited 2 kids from each school, 1 boy, 1 girl, following the Roman Cup, to come and have a free 6-week course at the squash club all together, and only for those kids. So not coming into our current programs. This is a new course, so they wouldn't feel overwhelmed because they already knew quite a lot of the kids. Mm-hmm. And that's been fairly successful for us.
Yeah. So have you found from that you're getting more kind of staying at the club? Yeah,
we'd get, like before we started that program, even after all the schoolwork, we weren't getting that many into the club. Mm-hmm. But now we've started that program, we get way more because they've sort of had a lot of buy-ins. They've done school squash, they've played a competition, they've done a course at the squash club, and then they sort of know the coaches well enough to sort of trust them and then really enjoy the sport, and that's really worked for us.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think talking to some clubs, I think that's the bit that they struggle with, is the kind of retention of students from the school into the club programs. And I think that's really useful for coaches to know that something like that can help retain more numbers. Yeah, and that just worked for us, and might not necessarily work for other people, but we did have a lot of sort of years where we were like, oh, we can't get people in, like we've done all this work, we've done all this school work, we've done a massive school competition. Mm-hmm. And it's just not happening. So we had to sort of keep thinking of ways to do it. And that was the best way that we found. Yeah. I think it's like we said at the beginning, don't be afraid to try something new with it, because it might just work. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go on to juniors as our next area. Before I let Lauren, she's also got a very successful junior program. So before I let her speak about it, just a couple of maybe key points about the juniors. Like obviously most clubs want to build their junior programs. They are the future of the club and the sport, and we want to try and develop that as much as we can. And this is where the importance of the links with the schools come in. I think, like you said, Lauren, historically with squash, and I was exactly the same because my dad played. If your parents play, then you play, and it's harder to get people outside of that to come in. So that's where it's important to have those links. You have some sort of development pathway. So you start them off with maybe the young ones with some real basic things, and then you work your way up into maybe more of an elite squad as they get older in the juniors. I think it has to be fun. I think that's a really, really key thing with the juniors. You want them to stick at it. You want them to be enjoying themselves. So fun, and also probably a social aspect of that as well, by having fun with their mates and stuff, playing the sport. One thing as well that we, like at Scottish Squash, try and encourage some of our top juniors to do is use like all the available resources at the club, and such as playing adults, because I think as juniors you tend to probably play against the same sort of people all the time, and then you play against adults at a club that you'll come across all sorts of different styles that you have to deal with. Maybe an older member who is a lob dropper, figuring out how to beat them, and just even the physical. What was that?
I said, you're a lob dropper.
Yeah, that's me. That's my game. Yes. And even like just the dealing with the physicality that comes with playing adults, and I think it just progresses their learning and stuff a lot quicker. So that's something that we really encourage. I think Lauren brought up a big point with this. So I think with juniors playing adults, there's always the safeguarding thing. So it's just making sure, I suppose, that parents know what's going on and maybe that they're there. That's a big part of stuff now. And I know a lot of the Scottish Squash members or coaches have had to go through the safeguarding and stuff recently. So it's just thinking of stuff like that as well. So Lauren, do you want to tell us about the junior program that you run? There's some examples there in the photos of the Junior Progress Awards that you use.
Yeah, I'll come on to that in a second. Yeah, just so people know, the club I'm at now, which is the Army Barracks, is not usually for civilians, so you can't book a court. So the examples I'm giving you here are probably slightly different to your club, because we have access to basically 5 courts all day, every day, with occasionally one army officer playing at the end. So I understand the difficulties, having been in other clubs before, in terms of access to courts, and I've experienced some older members who saying, get those juniors off my court, I want to go. And having difficulties in terms of balance, like making sure that you keep everyone happy, so that people can play squash when they want to, they can book a court, but also you give access to the juniors, because they are the future and the next generation. It's important that all clubs understand that. So where I am now, we have over 100 juniors, which is amazing, and we worked hard to get over 100. It's not easy to.
How long has it taken you, do you think, to get to 100?
I was on my own for a while at the first club, but having moved to the Army Barracks, I think it's probably taken 5 years.
Okay.
I would say
just a steady growing.
Yeah. And the venues sort of halted us a bit because we don't get any adult members really. So there's no parents bringing their kids, and we have to sort of generate it ourselves. So I decided that it was important to have like a group structure. So we have 5 different levels for our juniors, and they know the pathway and they can work through it. So you sort of start at the bottom with mini squash, and then our top one is for our elite players. So any of sort of kids from 11 to 18 who are maybe in the county or regional programs. And we have 4 group sessions a week in the evening. on different days, and then we have our Saturday juniors as well. But like I said, we're lucky that we get 5 courts and we can have 20 kids at peak time. And I know that's not the same in all squash clubs. One of the things that when I was a junior, I loved the England Squash at the time did a certificate, like a sort of grading. So you could, it was bronze, silver and gold. And to get to the next level, you had to complete certain skills. And I remember it being brilliant because I would stand on court, not being able to do one of the skills and just practice it over and over. And I wanted to reintroduce it. So the Off the Wall team put together the Progress Awards, which you can see on the screen. And I've done an example page. So that was our level 3, all the skills in level 3. And it has a question at the bottom. And you can see the wristbands and the certificates that you get for passing each level. And we have 6 levels. And the first 2 levels you can do in a primary school hall. So you could do it with your school's work. And the level 3 to 6 is has to be on a squash court, and that has been really good, and we've translated it into different languages for different countries who've got it now, which is really good, and we use that at the club to test how they're getting on, so see how the juniors are progressing. So at the end of the month we have a testing week, so when you come to your group you will be tested on your next level. And we have just started writing level 7 and 8 during this time while we're bored, which is great. And then there's been some other initiatives that we've sort of had. So we just to engage the kids, we have a player of the month.
Yeah.
So whoever we think is sort of improved and had the right attitude, they get player of the month and they get t-shirt. And we've done different trips. So I think that sort of bringing the kids together to get to know each other is important. We do a trip every year to Canary Wharf. We take the kids there because it's important for them to be able to see top level squash. We've done a European trip, which was interesting, taking loads of kids away to the Dutch Junior Open. And then the things that you probably maybe already do in your club, like holiday squads, doing your tournaments. So the Scottish squash tournaments, bringing them to your club. We do the same with ours. We have a few England squash sanctioned events that we bring to our club. Like silly challenges, we've done like who can do the fastest court sprints in 20 minutes and had like in a minute, and like had a leaderboard. So they were all trying to beat each other. Again, like having a community feel is really important. I think the biggest thing for us is how important social media is and communication. So we're pretty lucky. Daryl's wife, Lucy, is a whiz at that, and she takes charge, and she's managed to sort of get our name out in the local community just via social media, and it has really helped. So I think communication with your members is key, and now we have the ability to do that. We have so many different sort of outlets that you can use to contact people. I think it's important. Like I have a big broadcast list on my WhatsApp group, and occasionally I just message all the members, and it just especially now reminds them of, oh yeah, squash. Oh yeah, I don't want to lose contact with that because I love playing squash, and it is that constant communication. And the other thing that I think is really important is having the right coaching group. So we have sort of a team of coaches, and I'm very lucky that they are so dedicated and passionate, and they have the same feelings as me. They maybe don't graft stupidly as I do, but we don't really have a hierarchy. Although we have coaches that maybe have a bit more experience, we don't feel there's a hierarchy. Everyone has a say. Everyone shares ideas, and I think that's important. I don't like to be a dictator.
And so all those coaches that are involved in all the different aspects of the program, do they help with development stuff, like resources and stuff as well?
Yeah. So we sit and we have meetings, and we're just about to come up with a resource for mini squash, because I know that's a scary thought for most coaches, coaching 3 to 5 year olds. So we were coming up with a resource for that, and I thought it's so important to engage all the coaches, because that's how you get all the ideas together.
Yeah. And I think that's, like we said at the beginning, just the kind of sharing ideas.
Yeah,
you can come up with some amazing things when you kind of bounce off each other, and I think that's a really important part of like developing a program.
Yeah, and I think as well, like trying to link in with the other clubs in your area.
Mm-hmm.
So not holding everything just to you, like really engaging with the other clubs, having friendly matches against other clubs, like even having a team league is really important. And not to like close everything, like you said earlier at the start about sharing ideas, and it's important for every country to share ideas. Like one of the local clubs to us, because where I am, kids can't book courts, so we don't have any leagues, we don't have any team squash. We send our juniors to a local club to join and have a club feel. Like they've got a bar, we don't have a bar. They have leagues, team squash, social events, and we're not precious about our kids. Like we send them there to become members, so that they have that squash feel, and they stay with us and carry on going flitting between the two. But it's important to share.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably, if anything else, from this webinar, that's probably one of the key messages I'd like everyone to kind of latch on to, I think. So just before we move on to the next area, Alan, is there any questions or anything from anyone?
There's a couple of questions or points come in. One quickly, so Andrew was asking around the Coaches Forum, which you mentioned, Kylie. So we run our Coaches Forum through Microsoft Teams as well, but if that's something you want more info on, I've dropped you a note back, Andrew, feel free to get in touch. Lauren, someone was asking around, so going back to the school programme that's obviously been so successful, I don't know how much you can maybe share or around like the financial model that maybe goes behind the school's model that you deliver to make it successful. Is it something, I guess, do you need to provide that just out of your own time in order to help the growth of the business, out with school, or is it financially supported through, like sponsorship or investment, maybe through governing bodies or other funding streams? I don't know if you can go into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a good question. So in England, and I'm not sure if it's the same in Scotland, but in primary schools, they get a set budget per year that's called a pupil premium sport budget. And they have to spend that money on sport in school. And each primary school can choose how they spend it. And we've managed to tap into that money. So any sort of session that we do during school time is paid for by the school, and they pay an hourly rate for 2 coaches to come in. And then we do after school clubs as well, which is paid for by the parents. So they pay sort of, £1.50 an hour to do an after school club. So anything after school is usually paid for by the parents, but during school time, which is where we do most of our work, we're pretty lucky that the schools actually pay for that.
Cool. And I think, you touched on it, Lauren, that'll be different from, I guess, country to country, depending how that systems work, but hopefully that gives a little more info. And then just a quick point to add in, I think Andrew says that his mini squash classes are his favourite sessions of the week, so maybe that's someone to help you with the development of that resource.
Yeah, can I nick some ideas then?
I can remember running those ones and being exhausted after.
Yeah.
So that's us for now, but keep finding any other questions in the chat, guys, as we go through.
Okay, so the next group that we thought about were women and girls. So a program that Scottish Squash has started or piloted this last season is called Hit Squash. We were lucky enough to get a grant from the Women and Girls Fund to help us come up with this program, and we came up with Hit Squash. So that's just been piloted just in the last kind of few months. It's aimed at women who haven't played before and have maybe been in or are inactive. So it's to encourage them to come down to the club and try a new sport and get active again. It's a combination of squash and like high intensity exercises. We had a female activator, that's what we call them, so coach leading the sessions, and it's in development. I think after this pilot stage, some things will change, but I think it was a 12-week program initially, but that might be brought down a bit. And it went really well in the West. That was probably the place we've had it running the longest. Jen Saldana has done a great job in the area, and we've actually had she's had a lot of success with getting some of the participants after the course to actually stay and join the club, which is what we want. And that's kind of was one of the aims from the program was to get kind of more females or women and girls involved at the club. So after this pilot stage, we're looking to develop that resource into something that all clubs can use. So there'd be some kind of activator training, the course, the resource, some equipment. So that's kind of the next stage for us after. But I think we've been pretty happy with the success of it so far. And it's something that we would like to continue and for other clubs in Scotland to be able to use as a resource to get more women and girls involved. And if it really takes off, doesn't necessarily just the Hit Squash doesn't necessarily just have to be for females, but just at this stage, that's what we've kind of targeted at. Lauren, have you done anything around women and girls? I know when we discussed stuff previously, just around maybe potentially times you have run the sessions or how public they are, who's watching, that sort of stuff. Is there anything that you would recommend for women and girls sessions?
Yeah, when I started, I was like, yes, everything. I'm going to get loads of women playing, and I did a squash evolution thing, which is like a few festivals, and it was pretty good. But I sort of haven't focused on it as much, and mainly because actually pretty much half of our academy is girls. So I actually haven't thought about it for a while because we have a pretty even split. Yep. But one thing we have carried on is a ladies squash morning. And sort of over the years, one thing I've sort of thought about and sort of honed in on is that women on the whole want to do two things. They want to sweat for a bit, so feel like they've done a good workout. And the other thing I found is they love a natter, so they love to have a social.
Yeah.
And linking those two things is important. I know it's pretty cliche, but the women who come to our ladies squash, quite a lot of them are mums, so sort of harass the mums at junior sessions, said, "Oh, come along on a Friday morning," and they bring their friend, and that's how it's sort of grown, and they have a bit of a laugh with it. So they have T-shirts that on the back it says "All the gear, no idea," and they think it's quite funny. But having that sort of time when it's just women together most of the time I have to tell them to actually run around because they're talking too much on court. But for them to have that time where they get to run around, play sport, and not feel self-conscious. So they're at the club when no one's there. And that's a really big thing that when I've been talking to a lot of the women and girls, they always say, "Oh, there are going to be people watching. How many people were there at that time?" And when I was at another club, it was, I don't really like to play in the evenings because if I have to go on the main court, then I don't like people watching me. So it's just being aware of the fact that women do feel often quite self-conscious when they start a new sport. And just to reassure them that it's going to be all right. We're not like the world's best. We're just here to have a bit of a laugh. And I think that's been sort of quite important. And obviously, I don't want to take away from the women who actually like strive to be better and want to play in women's team, because they're just as important as well. But where I am, we've ended up focusing a bit more on participation rather than team squash. And the other thing that I don't know how popular it is in Scotland is racquetball. So I love racquetball. A lot of squash players don't really like racquetball, but I love racquetball, and it's a little bit easier to start off playing racquetball, I think. It's not quite so hard on the body, and that's quite a good way to start sort of ladies off if you play racquetball. They prefer it. Like the club in Ipswich, the ladies only want to play racquetball. They don't want to play squash, so they have a racquetball morning. But I don't know whether that's popular in Scotland or not.
I think there's definitely a few clubs that have racquetball as part of the club.
Yeah.
I think potentially ESC is an example of that. I think also just in the next section we'll maybe touch on that as well. But yeah, it's thinking of ways to get them kind of into the club and participating, having fun.
I remember talking to an Irish coach, and he was saying that every Friday at his club they have sort of a teenage girl night where they just come along and just play squash, and then they all have loads of pizza after. And it's a bit about the squash, but also about, like I said, it's about the social as well. And if you are struggling to get girls in, it might be a good idea to start in terms of the juniors, like a girl only session. Well, I haven't done that before, but I haven't really needed to, but I know that how it feels to be the only girl in a group of a squash club with 15 boys, which is sometimes quite intimidating for girls.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just thinking about any of the barriers that there are at a club that might prevent people from participating, and those are kind of some of them that would. So I think it's just trying to think along those lines as well, just so you're getting as much or as many people like joining in on the sessions as possible. Ellen, I think there's a couple of questions there.
Yeah, I think that takes on to a good point. So someone's asking around, in your experience, I guess, from what you have delivered, have you seen any benefit of having like maybe female coaches for specific women and girls sessions? I appreciate it's not probably possible at all points, but any experience in that, making sure that it's always a female coach working with a women and girls group?
Yeah. So I think with the hit squash stuff, and like we wanted to have a female activator to begin with, and we have found that's worked really well, especially in the West with Jen. She's been a really good role model and motivator for the ladies. And I was talking to David about this yesterday. Actually, when we do develop it more, we are going to try and see if there's any difference with a male leading it, because there might not be. And also, obviously, turning it into a program that can be for guys as well. One thing I would say, you don't have to be a female coach to coach females. It's definitely not a thing. I think it's personal preference for the player. So just because you're a male, please don't be discouraged about coaching women at all, because I think, like I said, it's personal preference for the player. But from my personal kind of point of view, like it'd be great to have more females coaching, and that's one thing I think with the hit squash we're trying to encourage a bit more as well, is trying to get more females into those coaching roles in clubs. And
then another question there, Lauren, when you spoke about like your coaching team and I guess growing that team to the full-time and part-time coaches now that you've got as part of Off the Wall Squash, what was like the journey and the reasoning behind the journey of that you went down to grow a team? Was it around just in order to keep growing, I guess, the business and the number of people that you can take through the programs? Or was it more, did you see other benefits of just growing a team to bring in different skills or knowledge and working with a wider team rather than just yourself?
It was to do with growth, quite a lot to do with growth. We were sort of getting busier than we could handle, but also having the skills to cover all the different age groups. So we had some elite coaches. So for a time we had Lee Drew, who I spoke about earlier, and then we had my dad, who has been an elite coach for a number of years. So being able to cover all our bases in terms of the different kids that we had, and then like with the younger coaches, so we had some kids who were coming out of our academy, sort of 16 onwards, and they were keen to get involved and help us out. So they actually wanted to become coaches, which was great, and we got them qualified, and they help out, and we've had sort of 2 new 16-year-olds since who've come on board and just want to help us out, and they've already been through our model as a player, so they know what to expect, and it's helped us grow more and more as well.
Was that all
Brilliant.
of the questions for that bit?
I think that's us for now.
Okay, so the next couple of areas. So the next one in the club, beginners. So with this, obviously they're new to the sport, so you're starting with the basics and then just trying to progress their skill level. I think it's really important that it's, and we've touched on this a bit as well, it's social, it's an encouraging environment, there's a bit of a sense of achievement, and also this is, I think with the beginner group, this is where you can help build their love for the game, because if they have that love for the game, they're going to stick at it and stay and keep playing. And for me, that's probably a real key thing when you are working with beginner players, building that love so they want to stay and play squash and choose that as their sport. I don't know about you, Lauren, but one thing when I was working in a club environment, I would try and do with my beginner sessions or courses that I'd run, they might be like 4 to 6 weeks. I would really aim by the end of that course that they would feel confident and comfortable to be able to go to the club themselves and play a game with someone else of their level. And so they would feel encouraged and kind of confident to do that. And that would be my aim with beginners is to try and get them to feel comfortable to actually just play. So teaching the basic skills, the rules, and because I know a lot of beginners doesn't matter how old you are, serve can be a real tricky one. So just making sure that they're comfortable with all the different schools to enable them to just go down to the club themselves and play. I've got a couple of examples there of stuff I did in New Zealand. I know it might sound a little bit stereotypical, so apologies for that, but Women and Wine, Blokes and Beer, and Mums and Bubs. So like Women and Wine was just like a 6 weeks beginner course for women. There was a free wine at the end of the session for them, so they stayed around and socialized, and that actually worked really well because they swapped numbers, they became friends, and then at the end of the 6 weeks they all kept playing together as a group. So that's one thing. It was the same with the guys. That worked really well. The Mums and Bubs, that's something that you can do during the day. So we spoke about that before, about finding things you can do during the day. So anyone with kids, I was lucky enough at the club I was at, there was a little kind of area we could cordon off to have kids play. They would look after each other's kids while one was on the court. And that worked quite well as well. And the same thing, they kind of stayed and socialized afterwards as well. So I don't know, you, Lauren, is there anything you do in particular for beginners?
Not necessarily. I think what you were saying about making them feel like they can play a game and they're confident playing is really important. Like, we all know how hard squash is to learn. It's like one of the hardest sports, and keeping people engaged and getting to the point where they can play and they feel like they can, play a proper game of squash and then maybe join the bottom leagues is really important. And encouraging them, making them realise that squash is hard, and we've all been there, and we've all not been able to serve, and just sort of keep encouraging them.
I think someone's just put a question, I just briefly saw it, Ellen. It was about one-to-one coaching. And I know we've probably spoken quite a bit about group stuff, but one-on-one coaching is definitely part of a coaching program. So I would say same or kind of principles apply, even if it's one-to-one. Obviously, they're just getting more of your attention when it's one-to-one, but I think that's also a really important part of a club coaching program. Not everyone wants to do one-to-one coaching. Some people just want to play. So yeah, I think from my point of view, I enjoy doing one-to-one. I find sometimes people can get more out of that, but to answer that question, one-on-one coaching is still a really important part of the overall coaching program.
Yeah, a good thing to do is to maybe, if you have a new member, to just give them a half an hour one-on-one taster session, just so that you can just go through the simple rules and how to hold the racket and sort of just get them on that stepping stone to start playing squash.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because it kind of minimizes the thing of being in a group. So sometimes people can be quite self-conscious in a group. So sometimes I think maybe as a lead into playing, that kind of one-on-one taster session would be a really good idea.
Yeah, and you might get more business from that in terms of one-to-one coaching afterwards.
Yeah. So the next group we have is adult participation. So some of the stuff we've already talked about is probably included in this as well, with the women and girls and beginners and stuff. I think one thing to think about when you're thinking about the adult participation part is it doesn't necessarily just have to be coaching based. So a club coaching program can involve stuff like club nights and box leagues and internal competitions, fun competitions, or even outside events as well. And I think that's probably an important thing to remember. It doesn't just have to be coaching based. I know there's a lot of different things that clubs do along those lines to help that, but that's an important part of it. I think it needs to be social and fun, and we've touched on that quite a bit already. And then there's other bits in here. I think just a couple of examples of things you could add in. So like racquetball, like you said, Lauren, I think we've talked about before as well. So maybe some older members who can't necessarily run around the squash court anymore, but can potentially use racquetball as a way to stay engaged in the club, a little bit easier on the body, so it keeps them in the sport longer. You could do fitness sessions. I used to run, I'm glad I don't really have to do this anymore, but 6 o'clock boot camps, right? So for people before work, and yeah, which was a bit brutal to get up to, but that's, people were keen to do that because they wanted to do something before work. Stuff like coach match play, if they don't want to necessarily have like that one-to-one coaching, but they might want you to come along and watch their matches and coach that way. So I think there's a lot of different ideas in there that don't necessarily just have to be like on court one, like coaching one-to-one. Is there anything else that you would put in there?
Yeah, I'd probably stay clear of the 6 a.m. starts, to be honest. I hear they do that a lot in America.
Yeah.
So I haven't gone there yet. I've just had a look. I wrote a few things down. So having a club championships is a good thing to do. And a lot of people love doubles. So doing doubles tournaments is always pretty fun. Bit dangerous at times, but maybe suggest wearing goggles. Exhibition matches, trying to get the pros to your club, is a brilliant thing to do, just to expose everyone to the top players. And one of the things that my mum used to do when she was a club manager was she used to sort of engage with the local businesses, and she used to have a corporate membership, so they could come and play during the day, and they would come in their lunch hour, or there's might be 6 of them, a few more, and they'd come and play someone else from their company in their lunch hour, and it kept the courts used during the day. So trying to engage with your local businesses is pretty key as well. But I think otherwise you covered quite a lot of it, Kylie. I think as a coach as well, like the social thing is important. So if you can, just every now and then, just stay and have a drink at the bar, just so that people see you. I've seen coaches before who finish their session, put their racket in their bag and zoom off. Yeah. And just every now and then sitting at the bar so the members can have a chat to you is pretty important. Like my mum used to buy some food every Friday. I used to wonder why she used to do this, but I soon worked it out. She used to spend about £20 on food every Friday, and then she used to put it on the bar at the club. Okay. And it kept the people drinking for much longer.
I think that's a really good point, though. Like we've talked about that building the community earlier as well, and I think it does include the coach. So being part of the coach, being part of the club, and being available and around for the members to kind of chat to and kind of get to know, I suppose. I think it helps kind of break the ice with people kind of probably wanting to come to you for coaching. So I think our very last area that we're going to talk about is competition and performance. So we've probably talked a lot about participation and beginners and stuff like that so far, but there's definitely going to be some players at your club that want to play competitively or are maybe on a performance pathway. So these are just a few ideas around that. So they might want a more structured training plan than maybe someone who just plays it socially. It might include other elements as well, like match analysis, strength and conditioning, sports psychology, nutrition. So these are the ones that are really trying to improve and get better all the time. So these other little elements can really come in and help them do that. And I think it's also important as well for this sort of group as you're encouraging them to play matches and stuff outside of the club as well. So the regional and national leagues, we've got them going in Scotland, and then outside competition. So with Scottish squash, we have senior gold, silver and bronzes, and also junior gold, silver and bronzes during the season for people to play. We've got things like a lot more now as well, like PSA closed satellites for some of the players to get experience at. So I think it's important, like this is a part of the coaching program as well, because there would definitely be players at the club that want to play competitively. I think, Lauren, you probably have some, especially maybe in the juniors, that come into this.
Yeah, we have a few England players, and giving them support is really important. We offer strength and conditioning, not actually in the academy, but we have a link with someone, a guy who's excellent, and we send our players to him because we don't feel like we have the right expertise to cover that, and I think it's important for them to go to a specialist. Same with sports psychology. So we have a lady who comes in to do sports psychology, and she's excellent. And so we send the players to her. So that's important. I think the other thing is, if you're in a club and you have team squash, to try and encourage your better juniors to maybe start playing in teams, in adult team squash. Like Kylie said, the safeguarding is important. but if you can encourage them to play in that level of competition, it's important. And just trying to get them into the system and for them to understand the system. So how does the Scottish system work, and how do they get into it, and what is the pathway to the top, and what they need to do, and how the rankings work, and just making sure they understand that, because for most parents it's an alien world, and you just need to make sure that they're on the right path. And that's what we do with our parents, is just educate them a bit on what they need to do, and how if their kid is talented, their whole life is going to flip upside down. And they're not going to have many weekends anymore.
That's true.
They're going to spend most of their time in a squash club. But just making them aware of that, I think, is important. And like I said, just giving them support. We're pretty lucky that we have access to Daryl, so he can come and get on court with the kids, and they really appreciate that. And I know not everyone has access to that. So yeah, I think that the support's important.
Okay, just before we move on to our last little bit, before we finish, is there any other questions or anything? I think we might have covered them.
There's nothing come in yet, but will we just give them maybe a minute or so if anyone's got questions up to this point? That'd be quite helpful. So there's somebody talking about, Andrew's talking about, like going back to the points around when you were talking about the juniors. He likes the idea, Lauren, of what Off the Wall Squash do around, issuing certificates or wristbands when you complete certain like skills. But in reality, could you really give everyone in the class except one child? Like, what's your thoughts around everyone in the class, achieving something and being given a certificate or a wristband, but perhaps one isn't making that level? Have you ever experienced that, and how do you I guess overcome that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tricky one. You never really want to disappoint a child. We've had a few times where quite a lot of the group have got the certificate and maybe a few haven't, but then what we say to them is, look, we'll go on court with you. Maybe one of the coaches will go on for 15 minutes when they have a bit of spare time and just practice that skill that you didn't pass, and remind them that's only one thing you've got to pass, or two things, and give them the opportunity to test if they want to, maybe earlier than the end of the month. But I think also like making kids understand that it's tough, and trying to make them a bit harder. Obviously disappointment is not what you want, but like toughen them up a bit, and you can't succeed unless you get to this point, and just doing it in the right way is important. Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Brilliant.
Was there any others?
Not yet, no. There might be a few more, but or bear with us, let's go for it actually. So Matt's asking around, do you think it can be too early for juniors to play adults? Do you think any stage of like a junior developing, do you think it's ever too early for juniors to play against adults or get involved in like adult leagues, for example? Does that, I guess, is it an age thing, or is it a standard thing? Any thoughts on? I guess to either of you.
Wait to go, Kat.
I think it can depend on probably the individual, the junior. Like some potentially are more mature than others, and maybe could handle playing adults better. Like I wouldn't necessarily say throwing a 10-year-old into playing adults is always a good thing, but I think judging just on an individual basis, like how well you think they can handle it. But also, again, you might have a player that maybe isn't as mature as you think, or can handle situations, and actually playing the adults helps that. So I don't think there's any set rules with it. I think it is probably more based on the the individual, and they might need the development by playing adults because they don't have anyone else to play as well.
And then another final question there. So, Lauren, when you link with schools in England, and again, this will be different between England and Scotland, but they're wondering, do you need to have like a teacher present in all the sessions that you deliver? And if so, does this cause any like availability, issues with your sessions? Certainly in Scotland, for example, Keith, this will vary from probably local authority to local authority, and really dependent on individual like schools, policies and procedures that they have in place, how that works in Scotland. But Lauren, what about in England? Does a teacher need to be present when you're in delivering sessions?
No. Well, we have a lot of different schools have different policies. So some of our schools would send the class teacher in. I mean, there's always two of us, and obviously we have all the qualifications up to date, and they know that they have a copy of all of that. But I also have some schools where I don't have a teacher in for the whole time, and they just trust sort of my judgment, and it's changed. I have some schools where the teacher's quite involved in the session. I've had another school where the teacher's been asleep in the corner. But it's ranged a lot. But I don't know, you'd have to look at sort of maybe, like you said, the local authority and their rules. But I've never had like a set rule from a whole area. Obviously, I'm just in Colchester, and the schools vary like just from one down the road to the other. But yeah, I think you'd probably have to check with the school first on their policy.
Cool. I'll let you move on, Kylie.
Okay. This is just the last bit. So I've kind of gone over where to start, some ideas from the different kind of areas or groups in a club. And this last bit is about maybe factors that can actually help the success of individual programs. So just that the programs match kind of what the members' needs and wants are. You promote the programs in the right way. And I think Laura touched on this before, like social media and everything around that. We had a good example actually with the hit squash when we were trying to get participants in that. Jen Saldana, who was running in the West, promoted it on kind of local community Facebook pages, and that got a lot of women involved. Before that, we'd actually been probably struggling to get the people involved. So I think it's finding the right areas and the right ways to promote the programs. And Lauren, I think from what you have said, you've been able to do that really well with all the social media side. Just making sure the club environment is like a welcoming, friendly one for people to want to come into the club. It's safe and kind of even inspiring. I know a lot of clubs will have like pictures of top squash players around, and it's just a place that people want to come and kind of hang out and socialize as well as play squash. Just a little bit around maybe how the coach behavior is probably the wrong word, but just what the coach does. So are they encouraging? Are they inclusive? Respectful, knowledgeable? All those sort of things that really helps with the success of the program. And again, we touched on this earlier as well, that creating that sense of community. I think that really helps people want to be more involved in the club and the programs that are on offer. And it then becomes the place that they want to socialise as well. And just the last two things, just keep engaged with participants. Like Lauren said before, like she's got like a group of people that she just sent out a message to on WhatsApp just to make sure they're okay during this time, or sending them little like words of encouragement and just different things like that, so they know that you care. I think that's a big thing. And just almost going full circle, review and get feedback from all the programs that you do. So after you've gone through them, just take another look, see what's worked and what hasn't, make any changes that you need to, and get feedback from the participants so that you can really provide the best programs possible to everyone at the club. Is there anything that you would add to that, Lauren?
I think all of those great points. I think the other thing that's also like financially quite a good thing to do is to contact your governing body, just to see if there's any funding available, and how you access it. That's always been a big thing for squash clubs. And I think in terms of promoting your programs, just contacting the local paper. And one of the things that I sort of learned, we've got a guy in our team that's been a top sports journalist, and he helps us with our articles and things to do with our promotion. And he always said to me when I started, don't expect the local paper to come to you, like go and chase them. So he even told me to write my own article. So I used to write my own article and send in a photo. So the local paper basically didn't have any work to do.
Yeah.
And they pretty much put it in the paper every time. Yeah. Because I took the work away from them. So just building that, and then obviously you get in the local paper, you start to promote yourself a bit more, and I think that's another good thing to do. But yeah, like in terms of the success, like I said at the beginning, it's about community and making people feel welcome in your club. Definitely.
I think that's probably a good place to finish. So I think if there's any other questions or anyone wants to share any other ideas, we've still got a little bit of time, so you can put them in the chat. We might have covered everything. I
think, yeah, at this stage, and anyone, I know sometimes typing out these questions for some people can take a bit of time, so even if you want to jump in your microphone, feel free and throw these in. But initially, thanks to, while we wait for some questions maybe coming in, thanks to both Kylie and Lauren for delivering that, and it's really interesting to hear the experience, Lauren, that the journey that you've gone on with Off the Wall Sports, and I guess best of luck for continued success once we get back to some form of activity.
Thank you.
It's really interesting. I think Kylie touched on a big point sort of throughout the webinar, but we're certainly keen in Scotland to try to grow our coaching network and pull our coaching network closer together. So that coaching forum is just one example of what we're doing. So certainly if you're involved in Scotland, I'd encourage you to get in touch if that's something that you're interested in being part of. It's very much a forum that we want to be driven by the coaching network rather than maybe us as the governing body, but we certainly share other opportunities in there, whether it's like CPD opportunities, other webinars, and our coaching team are also involved in that. So yeah, get in touch at any point. And then just to touch on the development team that we've got. So we've got a team of 3 club development officers, 2 that work regionally and 1 focused on the women and girls, along with a head of development. Like they're there to be make contact with them. They're happy to chat about how they can look at supporting the development of programs in squash in your club or facility. So if we can help with pointing them in the right direction or the right member of staff, just feel free to get in touch at any point. Quick question that's come in. So something around how do you get children to enter tournaments, and how do you encourage, I guess, children that are maybe coming to lessons to take that initial step into tournaments? Is there any good ways to go about it? Is there easier ways? Any ideas?
You want to take that one, Lauren?
I was going to say you could take it from a Scottish squash stance, because I'll tell you in a minute about something we started in Essex. Go on, you go.
I think initially, especially if it's ones that haven't played any sort of events before, it's encouraging them to play any internal club events first to kind of get used to that. I can remember I used to run a like a junior, one-day junior tournament at the club. It was absolute chaos, and there was a lot there that hadn't played at all before in a tournament, and there was tears and there was all sorts. But by the end of it, they were all kind of smiling and they'd got used to that environment. And then I think just encouraging them to say, look, like this will help in your development, to go out and play different people. Maybe make sure there's obviously someone there to support them. I think that's probably a key thing. Yeah, that's kind of from me what I would suggest.
Yeah, I had a sort of that problem down in Colchester with some of the kids, and they'd go to a bronze event in England, and they'd come back and go, say, I'm never doing that again. I got absolutely battered, and were quite demoralised about it. So I'm really heavily involved in Essex junior squash, and we decided to start a Grand Prix series. So we did 6 different tournaments in the season at different clubs around Essex, and it was only for those players who weren't in the county setup. So if you played county level or higher, you weren't allowed to play in it. And it was a great starter tournament because they knew that they'd turn up and they'd have a good hit, and they wouldn't get smashed off court. And that really took off, and we've had like tons of kids doing that. So in your local area, it might be quite a good thing to start a tournament like that, where if you're of a certain level, you're not allowed to play in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Is that another one in there, Alan? I think.
Yeah. So they're talking about obviously the reality of England and Scotland. They've got a feeling of both countries with a huge tradition of squash, and I guess something that both countries are still trying to grow. So thanks for that comment. But does the kind of ways of getting new players work in different countries from your experience? So, for example, like your experience in Norway, Lauren, or maybe Kylie in New Zealand. So, do those that are working in England and Scotland, is it similar in other countries? Can they be carried across, or any experience of maybe things that might be a little bit different?
From my point of view, from New Zealand, I think it is reasonably similar to England and Scotland. It is slightly different because we have a grading system in New Zealand as well that everyone who plays can go onto, and it's just kind of different levels. And also we have New Zealand have a really good tournament calendar, so there's local events on almost every weekend during the season. So I think that also means that players can play a lot more events from quite a young age, because there's a mixture of junior tournaments and senior tournaments, and all different graded events. So I know from when I started playing like tournaments when I was 10, and I had a lot to pick from, and I was always playing events and stuff. So that's probably one thing that's potentially slightly different from maybe Scotland anyway.
Yeah, I think Norway has been a challenge in that respect, because they haven't traditionally played squash. They usually out skiing most of the time, but they don't have a club structure like we do in England, and like the same with Scotland. And most of their players, when I've been to their clubs and taken maybe the junior squads, the players that are playing on the other courts, most of them don't know how to play. So they're just hitting the ball to each other. I'm not even sure they know the rules and then how to score anything. Whereas you just don't get that in England. When you go to a squash club, most people know how to play, and then you only have a few beginners. So it's been hard to educate them. And also they don't have any coaches. They have a very small handful of people who are actually actively coaching. And like we've said earlier, the coach is pretty key to this in terms of introducing people to the club, showing them how to play. So we've had to do things like make posters on how to hold the racket and to put up in the club, because the coach isn't going to be there. So just educating them maybe through the notice board and putting the rules up, having a rules poster and things like that. But it has been a challenge, and I know it's difficult in some countries. We have it pretty easy where we are just because of tradition.
Brilliant, thanks. I think that pretty much covers all our questions. So it's pretty much on time. So it's probably a good time to finish. So yeah, thanks again to you both. Really appreciate your time and drawing in your experience. I think just to touch on, so next week we've delivered, I think, 4 webinars now. Next week we're going to deliver our sort of final one of this block, which is focusing on more generic coaching and just developing coaching practice. That session is going to be led by Bob Eason. So Bob has previously worked for Sport Scotland for a number of years as a high performance manager. More recently was on our board of directors as our performance director, working closely with Paul when he came into his new post to drive forward, I guess, the philosophy that they're now focusing on. So Bob's got lots of experience in coach development, working with coaches from a number of different sports, not just squash. So definitely an opportunity that might be of interest to some. Other than that, we'll make this recording available. And in the meantime, like always, if we can help in any other way, please feel free to get in touch at any point. But I think that's us, unless Kylie, you or Lauren, you want to finish with anything?
No, that's all from me. Just thanks everyone for coming and listening to us. So hopefully you got some good information to take away.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks again, guys. Speak to you soon.
Thanks.
Cheers.